The birth of science during the Enlightenment has often been set in opposition to the traditional religious worldview of Christianity, so it can be a little surprising at first to see just how much science was actually done within the Catholic Church. One of the first thinkers to express a modern scientific outlook was not just an astronomer and mathematician, but also a Catholic priest named Pierre Gassendi. He had many scientific achievements, like being the first to observe and publish data on the transit of Mercury. But most importantly for today's video, he tried to harmonize the atomistic philosophy of Epicurus with Christian doctrine. This is pretty surprising, considering about 300 years earlier, Epicurus was held in such a low regard that Dante portrays him and his followers imprisoned in flaming coffins for eternity in the sixth circle of hell for believing that the soul dies with the body. The famous 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche would have this to say about the conflict between Epicureanism and Christianity. To this very day, many well-educated men think the triumph of Christianity over Greek philosophy is a proof of the superior truth of the former, although in this case it was simply the coarser and more powerful that triumphed over the more delicate and intellectual. As regards superiority of truth, it is evident that because of it the reviving sciences have connected themselves point for point with the philosophy of Epicurus, while Christianity has point for point recoiled from it. I know, Nietzsche can be pretty dramatic at times, but he's got a point. Epicurus, taking inspiration from the atomism of Democritus, formed a school of philosophy that was not only incredibly ahead of its time, it sounds like it was also the comfiest. Known as the Garden, his school was essentially a hippie commune that not only allowed women and slaves to join, but also encouraged vegetarianism. His atomistic, materialistic philosophy, along with his supposedly hedonistic ethics, and general criticism of popular religion, made him a controversial figure in his lifetime, and super avant-garde, since these ideas would not become widely accepted in Europe until about 2,000 years after his death. Epicureanism in the classical period would survive for only a few hundred years after his death, when it was outcompeted by other Hellenistic philosophies like Stoicism, which was more aligned with the traditional values of the growing Roman Empire. We should keep in mind that classical philosophies weren't just abstract pursuits, they were a whole way of life, and the Epicurean life was virtually extinct by the time of St. Augustine, who said that its ashes are so cold that not a single spark can be struck from them. And during the Christian period, Epicureanism became a byword for simply hedonism. By the time of the early modern period, when Epicureanism finally lost its bad connotation, its meaning was almost entirely removed from the original philosophy, and now an epicure is just somebody who enjoys good food. But as we'll see, this school of thought was about much more than food and pleasure, and Epicureanism would end up being revived by the time of the Enlightenment. Famous figures such as John Locke, Karl Marx, and the previously mentioned Pierre Gassendi would be influenced by and adopt aspects of Epicurean philosophy, and none other than Thomas Jefferson declared that, "I too am an Epicurean. I consider the genuine, not imputed doctrines of Epicurus as containing everything rational in moral philosophy which Greece and Rome have left us." Hey, I'm Matt, you're watching Nothing New, and today we're exploring the philosophy of Epicurus. We'll see why his ideas were not just controversial in the Christian period, but also in his own time, since he rejected popular views about the gods and advocated a materialistic philosophy. That's not to say he was an atheist. He believed in the gods, he just didn't believe that they were involved in any way with human affairs. We'll also see why it took almost 2,000 years for his ideas to become popular again. But first, want more videos on ancient philosophy? Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Anyways, let's get into it. The philosophy of the Hellenistic period developed primarily in response to the major political changes of that time, when the previously independent and proudly free city-states of Greece were conquered, first by Alexander the Great and later by Rome. The major schools of philosophy which formed in this period, Stoicism, Cynicism, and Epicureanism, all developed in response to the difficult times that they were living in, and as a result, there's a few common themes between them, since they were all responding to the same problems, more or less. They often rejected public or political life, and instead focused on finding peace and happiness in the pursuit of wisdom and virtue, with goals such as undisturbedness, self-sufficiency, and freedom from suffering. Epicurus rejected not just the political life, but also many points of the dominant philosophy of that period, Platonism. He believed that the senses were a reliable source of information about the world, unlike Plato, who thought that the senses deceived us and that only abstract reason can tell us anything about true reality. Knowledge was not innate as Plato thought, but learned through experience. And while we can misinterpret our sense data, the data itself does not lie. As he says in his letter to Pythocles, if a person fights the clear evidence of his senses, he will never be able to share in genuine tranquility. Since feeling and the senses were the final judges of truth, anything that is pleasurable was considered to be morally good, and anything painful to be morally evil. For this reason, he has been labeled a hedonist, and while it is somewhat correct in that he values physical pleasure above all, we shouldn't get confused here and think he was some party animal. To Epicurus, pleasure was just the absence of suffering, and he never advocated unrestrained sensuality and pleasure-seeking. As he says in his letter to Menicius, when we say that pleasure is the goal, we are not talking about the pleasure of profligates or that which lies in sensuality, as some ignorant persons think, or else those who do not agree with us or have followed our argument badly. Rather, it is freedom from bodily pain and anguish, for it is not continuous drinking and revels, nor the enjoyment of women and young boys, nor of fish and other foods that a luxurious table holds, which makes for a pleasant life, but sober reasoning, which examines the motives for every choice and avoidance, and which drives away those opinions resulting in the greatest disturbance to the soul. Epicurus made a distinction between two kinds of pleasure, moving and static. Moving pleasure is experienced when we go through the process of satisfying a desire, like eating when hungry. Once our desires are satiated, then we can experience static pleasure. Moving pleasures quickly fade and give rise to more desire. Therefore, we experience more static pleasure by tamping down our vain desires and being happy with less. Natural desires such as hunger are easy to satisfy and have natural limits. But the desire for wealth, fame, and power has no natural limit and cannot be satisfied because it is not a natural desire, but comes from societal pressure. When we look at what Epicurus actually taught, it's nothing like how he's portrayed. In medieval literature, he often appears as the gatekeeper to the Garden of Delights, and was said to be the patron of gluttons, drunks, and whores, being as he was the proprietor of the kitchen, the tavern, and the brothel. Because his communal school admitted women, Christians imagine wild orgies and feasts must have taken place, but it couldn't have been any further from the truth. While Epicurus did discourage marriage, he also discouraged sex, holding that friendship was more essential to the good life. One of his principal doctrines was that, of the things wisdom acquires for the blessedness of life as a whole, far the greatest is the possession of friendship. He wrote that a single piece of cheese could be as satisfying as an entire feast, and taught that it is not possible to live pleasurably without living sensibly and nobly and justly. We should not be good just out of fear of punishment, here or in the afterlife, but because it is impossible to gain peace with a guilty conscience. Criminals live in fear and paranoia, and can never be sure that their crimes won't be discovered, whereas the kind and just person has nothing to fear. So we don't have to fear being punished by the gods, but is that because they don't exist, or are they just too good for us? Epicurus says, "For the gods exist, of them we have distinct knowledge, but they are not such as the majority think them to be, for they do not maintain a constant view of what they think the gods are. The impious man is not he who confutes the gods of the majority, but he who applies to the gods the majority's opinions." Many philosophers, from Xenophanes to Plato, have argued against the popular and anthropomorphic portrayal of the gods, and Epicurus was no different. To Epicurus, the gods were so perfect that they were entirely removed from the concerns of humans. They didn't interfere in day-to-day life, or answer prayers, or have any real control over the natural world. For troubles and cares, anger and goodwill do not accord with blessedness, but rather arise in weakness, fear, and need for one's neighbors close by. The main cause of fear and suffering is caused by our superstitions around the gods, and the idea that we may suffer everlasting pain in the afterlife for our sins in our current lives. According to Epicurus, sensation was the result of the body. Therefore, when we die, our senses will merely stop, and the eternity after death will be just like the eternity before we were born. While the soul is the cause of sensation, he completely rejects the idea of an immaterial soul. It is not possible to imagine the soul existing and having sensation without the body, and experiencing these movements when there no longer exists that which encloses and surrounds the soul. One of the most notable aspects of Epicurean philosophy is their rational and fearless approach to death, which they saw as no more than the scattering of a collection of atoms. Roman Epicureans would express this acceptance of death by inscribing on their tombstones the saying, "I was not, I was. I am not, I do not care." Like the pre-Socratics, Epicurus always sought out natural explanations for natural phenomena, such as lightning, thunder, and rainbows. He argued for an infinite and eternal universe, and that since nothing comes from nothing, on an ultimate level, the universe doesn't change. since things cannot be entirely destroyed, nor can anything new enter into the universe which would cause it to change. He also thought that the number of atoms and worlds in the universe were also infinite in number. This philosophy created one main problem that Epicurus had to solve, a problem which has reappeared in the modern age. If the laws that govern the interactions of atoms are deterministic, why does it seem like we have free will? Is free will an illusion? Or is it possible that free will and determinism are actually compatible? More so, if the universe is literally nothing but atoms and void, how did any atoms interact or join together? Why aren't all the atoms just falling down through infinite space at a uniform rate? To answer this, Epicurus introduced the idea of a swerve, or an unpredictable force which deflected the atoms from their deterministic course. As the Roman poet Lucretius says, "When atoms move straight down through the void by their own weight, they deflect a bit in space at a quite uncertain time and in uncertain places, just enough that you could say that their motion has changed. But if they were not in the habit of swerving, they would all fall straight down through the depths of the void like drops of rain, and no collision would occur, nor would any blow be produced among the atoms. In that case, nature would never have produced anything." This randomness is what allowed for free will, and ethical responsibility. No soul required. So that's Epicurean philosophy in a nutshell. I want to explore his atomism more when we eventually cover the later Roman Epicurean philosopher Lucretius and his beautiful poem on the nature of things. But this was just an introduction, so I don't want to overload you with philosophy. But I can't end the video without a more thorough discussion of how Epicureanism was generally received by mainstream society. In case you weren't aware, from the beginning of the Christian religion, Platonism and to a certain extent Greek philosophy in general has been a core element of their philosophy and theology. A famous 20th century theologian, Dean Ing, said that Platonism is part of the vital structure of Christian theology. If people would read Plotinus, who worked to reconcile Platonism with scripture, they would understand better the real continuity between the old culture and the new religion. And they might realize the utter impossibility of excising Platonism from Christianity without tearing Christianity to pieces. The Galilean gospel, as it proceeded from the lips of Jesus, was doubtless unaffected by Greek philosophy, but early Christianity from its very beginning was formed by a confluence of Jewish and Hellenic religious ideas. We'll look at the connection between Jerusalem and Athens in more depth when I start really covering Platonism, but for now, just think about it. Plato thought that the material world and the senses were deceptive, that we have souls and that the true reality was the spiritual or mental realm that our souls participated in. And he believed that the nature of our souls was essentially immaterial and eternal. In Christianity, this life in the world seemed to be just a test to determine where we end up in the world to come, a heaven where we live for eternity as souls, and we sin by giving in to sensual material pursuits. As Nietzsche says, Christianity is Platonism for the people. Both rejected materialistic philosophies, so it should be obvious why Epicureanism had such a bad reception from the mainstream Roman and Christian worlds. We can also see why it became so popular with the rise of scientific materialism during the European Enlightenment. But if you want to know which philosopher was more widely read throughout time, all you have to do is look at what survives of their writings. You might have seen the hefty tome that is the complete works of Plato on my desk in these videos. Imagine the work it must have taken to preserve all of these dialogues throughout time. The surviving works of Epicurus, on the other hand, is a sorry sight. Epicurus was a prolific writer. He wrote over 300 treatises on a wide range of topics, and yet what survives barely fills 100 pages. What can I say? It's a bummer, dude. I think the proof of Epicurus' wisdom can be found in the joyful quality of his life, which according to his followers he maintained until death, as he was dying a slow and painful death, perhaps caused by kidney stones. Ouch. He said that the simple joy of remembering his philosophical conversations with friends was enough to counterbalance the pain. Though his philosophy could be controversial, like previous philosophers who tried to challenge the popular conception of the gods, he also had a broad popular following, especially among women and slaves. His birthday, the 20th of February, would end up becoming an Epicurean celebration where friends gathered to share a meal and some wine, and this would be celebrated not just in February, but the 20th of every month, when fellow Epicureans would greet each other by saying Happy 20th, which means that people have been celebrating 420 for a lot longer than you thought. Anyways, that's all for today. Make sure to like the video if you learned something new, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. See you next time, and until then, Happy 20th.